The Only Road, Chapter 20. Jaime woke up with the sun. He could still feel the cold that had lodged itself in his bones, but already the sun's rays were warming him up. His legs were stiff and half asleep from having been curled up under his shirt all night. Now with the daylight he took in the vast landscape. The scattered trees seemed more like bushes, and the bushes were more spiny growths surrounded by brittle grass, all of them in various shades of brown and tan from the lack of water. From where Jaime stood he couldn't even see the train tracks. The only good news that was the only good news was that there were no trucks and no dust being kicked up, and there was nowhere Los Fuegos could be hiding, waiting to pounce. Now that he could see, he had to find Angela. She was out there somewhere. He knew it, just like he knew she wasn't. No, she was out there. He just had to find her. He found truck tracks and followed them, but couldn't be sure they were made by the truck that had been after him. He never came across the hole that had almost swallowed him. Occasionally he found footprints, but they were too scuffed up to tell him anything. There had been lots of other people who jumped off the train, and yet Jaime didn't see any evidence of another soul. Angela! He removed his sketchbook from his waist and took off his shirt and waved it over his head like a flag, even though he was still cold. Angela! He turned in a slow circle, focusing on every detail he could see and listening as hard as he could. He waved his shirt and called out again. Then there it was, a faint sound. Something moved in the distance by a bush. An animal, maybe. Didn't matter. Shirt and sketchbook clutched tight, he ran. As he got closer, the shape took form. First black, then blue. Neither were colors that belonged in the browns and tans of the desert. A call came, louder than before, but muffled in the wind. A few seconds later arms waved over her head, and there was no doubt who she was. Angela stayed sitting, but held her arms out to him. He dived right into them. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He couldn't stop the tears that stained his dirt-caked face. She hugged and kissed him, then kissed and hugged him some more as she cried too. You're here. You're alive. I didn't mean to lose the bags, he sobbed into her shoulder, and if you and Zavi want to be alone, I don't care, just don't leave me. Who cares about the bags? She shook him by the arms. Don't you ever leave me again, you hear? Please forgive me. I never meant for Miguel to die. For the first time, he let his guilt pour out as he confessed. If I hadn't been sick, then you would be dead too, and I couldn't have dealt with that. Miguel's death wasn't your fault. Jaime hugged her tight. She was his whole family, the only thing that mattered. After a minute he realized there was still something wrong. Izavi? He looked around. Angela shook her head. I don't know. We got separated. Now that it's day, he'll be here soon. Jaime guaranteed. Any minute Vida would be leading Zavi to them. If Jaime could find Angela in the middle of the desert with nothing more than his senses and a family-honing gut feeling, Vida could sniff them out. She knew her family too. She would find them. He knew it. Or we can look for him. I can't walk, Angela said, wincing and looking like she might start crying again. I hurt myself last night. Jaime glanced at her legs. A huge rip exposed her left thigh, but there was no sign of a cut. On the other leg, however, in the gap of flesh revealed between her jeans and sock, her right ankle looked double the size of the other. Is it painful? She tried to laugh. Like an elephant is balancing on it. It won't take any weight. Jaime stood and held out a helping hand. You're not, she started, then looked him up and down with the sun behind him casting a low morning shadow. When did you get so tall? Jaime shrugged and teased. Last Tuesday? Angela cracked a smile. She took hold of his hand, but as soon as she put the slightest pressure on the ankle, she crumpled back to the ground. We should make some kind of brace, he said. Con qué? We don't have anything. Jaime looked around. One of the bush-like trees stood nearby, but none of its branches would work. Too thin. The grass wasn't long enough, much less strong enough to weave. It crumbled in his hands when he picked it. Still, there had to be something. His eyes landed on his sketchbook lying in a heap with his shirt. If only he could draw her crutches that would come alive to help her out. Do you still have your sewing kit? Angela pulled the packet of needles, thread, and tiny scissors from her pocket. Before she could stop him, he grabbed his sketchbook and tore off the front cover. The tiny scissors couldn't cut the cover, but he took one of the blades and made an incision in the middle of each side, and was able to bend it until it tore in half. Then he cut a strip from the hem of his shirt and double-checked Tia hadn't sewed money into it. She hadn't. He took off Angela's shoe, but left on her sock, pulling it up her leg. Angela bit her lip in pain. He sandwiched her foot between the two cover halves and secured it tight with the strips of cloth from his shirt. He loosened the laces. He carefully placed her shoe over the mock cast. It was the best he could do. That feels better, Angela said. He couldn't tell if she was lying or if it really did work. She hadn't tried standing again. But before she could, a high-pitched yip came from the south. A white and brown blur dashed toward them, a single ear flopping up and down. Vida! The dog greeted them with slobbery kisses, while Jaime and Angela petted and scratched her. They stared at the horizon and waited. Vida, where's Zavi? Angela finally asked the dog. Vida laid down with her muzzle over her paws, staring at them with sad eyes. Angela repeated the question. Where's Zavi? The dog looked away as if she couldn't bear the awful truth. Zavi wasn't coming.